Hello, welcome to our John 14 Bible study. This is my beautiful wife, Lizzie Karras. My name is Ryan Karras, and we're going to be walking through John 14, 1 through 7 with you today. The chapter starts out with Jesus telling his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." In the preceding chapter, Jesus is talking about leaving his disciples, and they still don't fully understand his mission. In our lives, especially during times such as these, our hearts are often troubled because we can't see or understand how God works through crisis, tragedy, loss, or disappointment.
Jesus simply asked for our trust in his sovereign plan. A plan that's so much better than we can ever imagine. That's why we must trust in the truth of the gospel. It's interesting to note that Jesus is giving them this encouragement, knowing full well that in just a short time later the disciples would abandon him, disown him, and go into hiding when we needed them the most. This is the amazing thing about God. He knows our flaws and our weaknesses. He knows we often lack faith, but he still loves us through our lack of faith and understanding his plan. After his resurrection, Jesus redeemed his disciples and empowered them with the Holy Spirit. He can do the same for you and me. All we need to do is trust in him.
In verses 2 through 3, Jesus is talking about leaving his disciples and going to his Father's house to prepare a place for them. These verses were meant as an encouragement to his disciples, as he knew that his death would upset, confuse, and sadden them. Jesus talks about many mansions in his Father's house. We think of mansions as usually pretty large buildings. He's using this imagery because Jesus wanted us to know there's lots of room in heaven for all who believe and trust in Jesus. Isn't it interesting that in Matthew 7:13 through 14, Jesus says that the path to salvation is narrow, but the reward for walking that path is larger than we can even imagine.
In verse 5, Jesus is questioned by Thomas. Thomas asks where he is going and how can they know the way. He's thinking in temporal, earthly terms. Jesus' response is detailed in verses 6 through 7. After all this time with Jesus, the disciples still didn't get it. They've seen the miracles upon miracles, but still didn't understand. For the most part, they still see Jesus as a military king who was sent by God to save the people from the oppression of the Romans. I don't know about you, but I often find myself acting like a doubting Thomas, even after God has moved so powerfully in my life. It was the same with Thomas, who later in John 20, verse 24 through 29, still doubts even after Jesus died and was resurrected. He literally won't believe until he can touch the nail holes in Jesus' side and hands. Like he does in John 20, verses 24 through 29, Jesus responds gently to Thomas' unbelief in chapters 6 and 7. He answers, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now let's break that down.
When Jesus says he is the way, that he doesn't just teach and preach the way to salvation or the way to know God, but that salvation can only be found if we attach ourselves to Jesus. Abiding in him leads to the Father. Abiding in him reveals God's truth and ultimately leads to a full life. When Jesus says he's the truth, he's saying that he personifies what we should know and believe about God, what we should do as children of God, and what kind of people we should be, which are conduits of his truth, grace, and mercy. When Jesus says he's the life, he's making a really bold statement. Back in his time, the religious leaders' rituals, laws, and regulations were thought of as a way to gain favor in the acceptance of God. However, by making this absolute statement that he is the life, Jesus is saying that only in him can life be found, not by religious rituals, practices, or good works. In verse 6, Jesus makes a bold claim. No one comes to the Father except through him. This is really bold because it essentially says two things. Number one, Jesus is the way to the Father, not a way to the Father. All the rituals, works, and things we do to gain favor with God fall short of Jesus' perfection. This really infuriated the religious leaders of the time because they were so proud of their traditions, rituals, and the control over the people that they held.
Jesus goes on to say in verse 7, if you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him, and you have seen him. It is really interesting to note in this verse, the Greek words translation of knew better translate in this context to recognize. In other words, Jesus is saying here that his disciples really had not recognized him for who he really was. At this point, I had to stop and ask myself, do I really recognize Jesus? Like the disciples, am I only interested in what Jesus can do for me, or am I pursuing a deep, meaningful relationship with my Creator?
Finally, in the last verse, Jesus says that because we know him, we know God. Are you looking to know God on a deeper level? Amid all the chaos and uncertainty and the fear that surrounds us, God reminds us in Proverbs 8:17 that he loves those who love him and those who seek to find him. So I encourage you today to seek God with all your heart mind, and soul, and he will find you. Thanks for listening. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.